The Germans employed large numbers of the chassis of captured French tanks as the basis of self-propelled guns. While a number of FCM and Hotchkiss chassis were employed to mount the Pak-40, the greatest number were manufactured using the Lorraine tracked carrier. A sizable quantity of these reliable machines had fallen into German hands in 1940, and in 1942, with the desperate need to motorize as many anti-tank guns as possible, the decision was taken to convert 170 Lorraine carriers to mount the Pak-40. While a number found their way to Russia and Italy, the bulk were retained for service with the occupation forces in France. Film of the Lorraine Schlepper is rare, and this comes from Normandy in 1944. Few, if any, of these machines were to survive the destruction of the German forces in the campaign. Most extensively converted of all the French types was the Hotchkiss H-39, which was effectively gutted and rebuilt to mount the Pak-40, just 24 being so modified. All served in France. The final chassis to be adopted to mount the Pak-40 was very much a desperate expedient that reflected Germany's dire military predicament in late 1944. In a bid to place as many anti-tank guns as possible on self-propelled mounts, Hitler ordered that the 251D half-track be modified to mount the Pak-40. The complete weapon, less its wheels, was fitted with little modification into the half-track. Serviced by a crew of 4, it carried 22 rounds of 75mm ammunition. However, the weapon overstressed the chassis, and the 251-22 was decidedly overweight. One of the first Hetzers to come off the production lines was presented to Hitler on the occasion of his birthday on the 20th of April 1944. This new variation on the Panzer 38T chassis marked a radical shift away from the conventional tank hunter with its highly vulnerable open-topped crew and gun compartment. The Hetzer, although designed for service in tank hunting battalions, was modelled on the purpose-designed and sophisticated tank destroyers with their fully enclosed and armoured bodies. It was for this reason that the Hetzer was classified not as a Panzerjäger but as a Jagdpanzer. Production of the Hetzer began at the Skoda works and at BMM in May 1944 with the phase-out of the Marder III. Primary armament remained the 75mm gun. While the enclosed armoured body offered the crew far better personal protection than the earlier tank hunters, it also led to cramped conditions, making movement within the machine quite difficult. This also inhibited movement of the gun, which had a constricted field of fire in consequence. In spite of these limitations, the Hetzer became one of the most effective and frequently encountered vehicles serving in the German army in the last year of the war. Successful employment of the assault gun in its adoptive role of tank destroyer led to the development of one type to fulfill both roles, built round an armoured body mounted on the chassis of the Panzer IV. The Jagdpanzer IV entered production with WOMAG in January 1944 and mounted a 75mm L-48 cannon. These served with the 116th Panzer Division in Normandy. In August 1944, the Jagdpanzer IV was upgunned to carry the 75mm L-70 cannon as mounted on the Panther tank. As the weight of the gun made the chassis nose heavy, the rubber tyres on the first two bogies were replaced with steel wheels. Parallel to the Panzer IV-70 built by WOMAG was a variation produced by Nibelungenwerke of Austria. A modified Jagdpanzer IV body was grafted directly onto a standard Panzer IV hull. This led to the Panzer IV-70A, distinguishable from the WOMAG model by its vertical sides. The largest, heaviest and most powerful anti-tank gun to see regular service with the German army was the 88mm Pak-43. The weapon realized its maximum muzzle velocity of 1,130 meters per second when using tungsten shot and could penetrate a T-34 up to 3,500 meters. Employing an identical chassis derived from the Panzer III and IV and sharing the same superstructure as the Hummel self-propelled gun, the 88mm Pak-43 armed Nashorn first saw employment during Operation Citadel in July 1943. While similar in appearance to earlier improvised Panzerjäger, the Nashorn was very much a purpose-designed vehicle built around the Pak-43. Unlike its smaller brethren, it was not distributed to Panzerjäger battalions, but retained in special detachments at corps level and farmed out according to need. Most of the 494 built served in Russia, but were encountered in Italy, serving through to war's end. The standard field gun employed by the German army at divisional level from the time of its introduction in 1935 to the end of the war was the 105mm FH-18. This piece saw service on every front, from the frozen wastes of northern Finland to the boiling desert of North Africa. A versatile and widely employed weapon, the FH-18 utilised a split-trail carriage and, in earlier models, large pressed steel centre rubber-tyred wheels. On later variants, these were replaced with spoke types. Firing a 14.8 kilogram shell, it could range out to a maximum distance of approximately 10,500 metres. Experience in the East, where the gun's weight caused it to sink in the mud, led to the employment of a lighter carriage derived from the 75mm Pak 40 anti-tank gun, while the 2514 and the 3-ton 11 half-tracks were employed to tow the 105mm gun in North Africa and Russia. The bulk of those employed in Europe and the East relied on horse-drawn artillery teams. In 1939, a muzzle brake was added to increase the range of the gun. Designed in 1942 to confer greater mobility for the 105mm guns attached to mobile formations, the Vesper self-propelled gun employed a much modified Panzer II chassis. Although designed by Alket, production was undertaken by Farmo. In February 1943, the decision was taken to divert the production of all Panzer II chassis to the manufacture of the Vesper. The new self-propelled gun first saw employment during Operation Citadel, the Kursk offensive in July 1943. Seen in action are those belonging to the SP detachment of the 3rd SS Panzergrenadier Division Totenkopf. From mid-1943 onwards, the Vesper began to appear in growing numbers in the self-propelled artillery units of the Panzer and Panzergrenadier divisions. Equipment of formations in the East received priority, as the need of mobile artillery to move and support the rapidly moving panzer formations became paramount, as they were stretched ever more thinly, being moved from one place to another to combat ever-increasing Soviet breakthrough. The ability of panzer formations to deploy their own mobile artillery allowed them to maximize their limited assets when launching counterattacks against the seemingly ever-growing Red Army. Deployed close to the front line, the Vespers would launch a concentrated barrage prior to the attack and then accompany the armour as it moved forward. Ad hoc battle groups comprising many diverse weapons, including Vespers, were rapidly put together by the Germans to deal with enemy breakthroughs, such as seen here in the late summer of 1944. A local counterattack is launched by German forces supported by Stukas in western Byelorussia. Overseeing the operation is Luftwaffe General Robert Ritter von Greem. After the preliminary air bombardment, German infantry moved forward to deal with the enemy. The weaponry employed in the Kampfergruppe includes Panther tanks, Marder 3 tank destroyers, armoured personnel carriers, mobile flak artillery, towed 88mm flak guns and self-propelled artillery support, provided by a small detachment of Vespers. The appearance of the Soviet Air Force flying Ilyushin II Sturmovix leads to a barrage of anti-aircraft fire from the 88mm guns. The Soviet aircraft try and target the panzers moving across the plain. A number are hit and shot down as 37mm guns join in the anti-aircraft barrage. The Vesper detachment now brings its guns to bear on identified enemy positions prior to a further infantry assault. Mobile 20mm flak Vierling now joins in fire as the aerial battle with the attacking Soviet Ilyushin IIs continues unabated. German ground troops move forward under attack from the Soviet aircraft as the flak guns continue to pour fire into the air to provide a protective barrage to the ground forces. A Sturmovik hit by German flak plunges to the ground. Although bombs from the Soviet aircraft still fall, German infantry continues to move forward. While casualties are moved from the field, the battle with the attacking Soviet ground attack aircraft continues unabated. Bombing and artillery fire combine to reduce the near horizon to a wall of explosions. In the final sequence, the 88mm flaks score another victim as a Soviet fighter streams smoke before diving to the ground. While the Vespa was generally welcomed by its operators, it was not without its faults. The Panzer II chassis made for a small vehicle, and the fighting compartment mounted at the rear of the machine was quite constricted for the four-man crew to service the gun. In common with other open-topped self-propelled weapons, it offered little protection, and it had a high silhouette. Nonetheless, the 676 produced, in addition to 159 munitions carriers that were employed to transport the 105mm ammunition, served well through to the end of the war. They were encountered not just in the East, but also in Western Europe by the Allies from June 1944 onwards. Reference has already been made to the extensive use the Germans made of captured French tanks for self-propelled guns. One of the most filmed employed an extensively modified Hotchkiss light tank chassis to mount the 105mm howitzer. 48 of these self-propelled guns were produced for units serving in France in 1942. These saw extensive action with the 8th Panzer Artillery Battalion in the Normandy campaign, and they served alongside Lorraine tracked carriers also modified to carry the 105mm FH-18. Just 24 of these were produced. As with all German vehicles serving in Normandy, a prerequisite for survival was the need to operate from cover. Although the distinctive camouflage scheme of overall sand with large block sections of olive green was effective, it was necessary to augment this by employing the trees and hedges of the Normandy countryside to hide from the constant presence of highly effective Allied fighter bombers. Once in place, the crew prepared the ammunition and began to fire. These SPs carried about 32 rounds, a similar amount to that of the Vespa. They are seen operating with a detachment of Hummel heavy SP guns from an SS Panzer division. Entering service in 1933, the SIG-33 equipped the heavy gun platoons of infantry regiments and remained in service until 1945. Limited to a maximum range of just 4,700 meters, its task was to lay down heavy fire and suppress enemy opposition as German infantry went into the attack. Its shell was relatively heavy at 38 kilograms, and the gun had a rate of fire of between 2 and 3 rounds per minute. It was this that saw it employed on the first self-propelled artillery vehicle developed for the German army. The decision to mount the SIG-33 on a self-propelled chassis led to the employment of the Panzer IB. The mount was designed by Alket of Berlin, who converted 38 Panzer I chassis in February 1940, and these were in service for the French campaign. The resultant vehicle weighed some 3 tons more than the standard Panzer IB. The 150mm gun was mounted in a large box-shaped compartment atop the hull and looked decidedly cumbersome. It was taken into battle by 6 heavy infantry gun companies in May 1940, each being attached to a panzer division. The only film of this vehicle in action shows it being used to effect, to blast defences as German infantry moved through a French town. In general, the vehicle proved successful in action and was later employed in the Balkans and Russia, finally disappearing from the battlefield in late 1943 when the survivors were serving with the 5th Panzer Division in the east. No others were built, for it was recognised that the gun overtaxed the light chassis and the very high silhouette was undesirable. An attempt to mount the SIG-33 on a Panzer II chassis in 1941 proved abortive, just 12 being built. Nevertheless, the SIG-33 on the Panzer IB provided the German army with much formative experience in the operation of self-propelled artillery.